Hello, hello, hello. I've been wearing Crocs for 10 years. True story. They were first introduced at the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show in 2002, and then I got them 3 years later. I grew up in Fort Lauderdale. Anyway, this talk's nothing about that. I said Croc. So my name's Michael. I'm the founder of World's Fair, and my personal goal, is to bring the World's Fair back to the U.S. The World's Fair, if you have no idea what that means, it's a 6-month international event that welcomes tens of millions of people, and it focuses on all things future. Trust me, I'll tell you more about it very soon. But today, my thing is the future of inspiration. And there's really two particular things I want to share with you, convince you of, whatever. The first is that inspiration is a resource that can be produced by all of us. And the second thing is that the World's Fair is the best place to find that resource. I heard a chuckle. I'm going to prove that chuckle. The whole thing for me started 5 years ago when I read that book, called The Devil in the White City, which was written by a guy named Eric Larson. And this book is about the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. And when I read this book, it obviously blew my mind. And I learned that 27 million people in 1893 traveled via horse and buggy and train, cars and planes didn't exist yet, to go to some event in Chicago called the World's Fair. And mind you, 27 million people in 1893 was 42% of the country. The total population was 63 million. That's wild. And once they got to the fair, they got to see electricity for the first time, thanks to some guy named Nikola Tesla, who was running around the fairgrounds plugging 100,000 light bulbs in. And this photo is legit how 27 million humans got to see electricity for the first time. We don't think twice about all these lights and stuff, but that's nuts. And then, they also got to ride in the world's first Ferris wheel. And, before I read the book, I didn't even think that there was, a guy who made the Ferris wheel. But it's called Ferris wheel because there was a guy named George with a funny mustache, last name Ferris Jr., who had this crazy idea for a monument to the fair. And each cart of this Ferris wheel held 60 people at once. So it was like a really bold first move. So I learned about all this stuff about that one fair, and I was like, wow, that is crazy. That is really, really crazy. And so I wanted to see, was this a one-time thing, or were there other World's Fairs? And so I kept learning. And I found out that there was a World's Fair in Paris in 1889. And there was a guy named Gustave who built something called the Eiffel Tower for that World's Fair. It was built as the entryway into the fair. So people, would walk underneath the Eiffel Tower to enter the fairgrounds. It was kind of like the world's most epic door. And then in 1962, in Seattle, it was the Space Needle that was built specifically for the World's Fair. That was the first ever space-themed fair, or space-related fair. In 1876, in Philadelphia, it was the telephone by Alexander Graham Bell, the world's first telephone at the 1876 World's Fair. In 1982, in Knoxville, Tennessee, it was the first ever touchscreen. I could do this for a long time, but I've learned it gets a little much. So, it became clear as I learned as much as I possibly could about World's Fairs that with the fair came the future. There were so many examples between 1851 and the present day across countries, across the whole freaking world, that the World's Fair inspired people to create. It was across countries and centuries, across space and time. The World's Fair was at the center of creation. And I'll have you know that time itself was actually invented at the... Just kidding. Time was invented way before World's Fairs. I think I had some of you were really zoning in there. So I learned all this stuff, and it was awesome. Like, the World's Fair made epic shit. It was awesome. But, that's only half the equation. The other thing I slowly realized was that there was over 1 billion people across all of these fairs who went to them and gained this resource called inspiration. And so there was a time when I wanted to talk to some of those people and really talk to people who had been to this thing and is it legit? Do people remember it? Well, what's the deal? And so I ran around Washington Square Park for a couple weekends in a row, approaching older looking folks like this nice man. And I would be like, have you been to a World's Fair? Some people were legit really creeped out, and that was that. But then some people were like, yeah, I have been to a World's Fair. And they started to tell me their story. And so here are a few of their stories.
That's right, Belgian waffles.
I put on 20 pounds.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think of, Belgian waffles.
Well, it was like stepping into another world. It was like getting out of wherever you were and your life and everything and going over there, which was wonderful and the future and promising and big and different and exciting.
When you walked into the fair, the first thing that you confront was the architecture.
I think it was called, the symbol of it was the trilon and the perisphere. It was a circular ball and then a three-sided tower that rose up beside it.
That globe made such an impression on me. I just thought it was beautiful. And when I was a kid, it was so big. That was the thing that blew me away, was the architecture.
It was the science, it was the different countries, the different cultures.
It's not just about the sex appeal of technology itself. It's about how it can change it for human beings.
Oh yeah, of course. Everything about it was cool. I mean, they had this empty park and all of a sudden this thing appeared there,
It's the wildly different buildings that were there. And it was this wonderful blast and cacophony of styles.
If you got involved in the vastness of it, you would get lost.
The thing I remember of that was the GM Motorama, in which you could look down at cars going all around, and these cars of the future.
Well, today it seems to me that there is so much material for a World's Fair.
The World's Fair, and I think I've mentioned this before, is about hope. It was about hope for me, for the future, and the possibility of what man and women can do.
And everyone has an exposition of exactly what they want to show, but altogether, it is the future.
When else are you going to get an opportunity to see the entire world come together over a single idea?
Well, it's a big deal. It's exciting. I mean, it's obvious to me.
Can't stay away from the World's Fair.
If they had another one, I would probably go again. My name is Kathy Von Hartz.
I'm Paul Engel.
I'm Elisa Rollo-Bennett.
I went to the 1939 World's Fair.
When I was 11 years old.
When I was 6 years old.
I'm Doris Deether, and I went to the World's Fair in 1964 for 2 weeks.
Yeah, they are awesome. And so I learned the history, and the World's Fair created epic stuff. I met the people, and 75 plus years later, they still had this, internal glow, this inspiration about them from an event they went to decades and decades ago. And it just, became very clear that people come to the World's Fair to find inspiration. One interesting story is a guy named Milton Hershey. You probably recognize his last name. But in 1893, Milton wasn't a famous guy. And he went to the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. And as the story goes, he stood in front of the German pavilion staring at this newfangled chocolate machine that they had brought over from Germany to exhibit at the World's Fair. And then he left the fair right away, and he went on to build his company, Hershey's Chocolate. And it's crazy to think that had Milton not actually gone to the World's Fair, would we have Hershey's Kisses? I don't know. And so, the next thing for me was, okay, so the fair creates big stuff, it affects people, but like what's going on? Like what is happening? What is inspiration? And for a long time, or growing up at least, for me and for a lot of us, inspiration is sort of this like abstract thing. We're surrounded with inspirational quotes. Dream as if you'll live forever, live as if you'll die today. What doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. Shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. Just do it. Oh. Just do it. And these things are great. They're very nice, but they're not like actionable. These inspiration is a cliche right now to us, I think, to most of us. And because I can't do much with these things. I just can't. And beyond this, I wasn't taught to be inspired. Nobody sat me down at age 6 and was like, Michael, you can live an inspired life, and this is exactly how. No one did that. I had people that taught me how to eat peas, to tie my shoes, which I no longer do, and how not to talk in class. But nobody taught me how to live my unique version of an inspired life, and that sucks because I think I could have been taught that. And so the next thing was like, okay, so how? How would you go about teaching somebody that? Like what is the essence that's happening at the World's Fair that's getting into people's minds, hearts, bodies, whatever, that's causing them to create? So, next, I looked into the science of inspiration, which does exist. You probably have to look for it. And so for a long time, scientists didn't pay any attention to inspiration because they thought it was too abstract and intangible, just not, even worthy of studying. And then more recently, within like the past decade or so, two scientists, Todd Thrash and Andrew Elliott specifically, thought maybe inspiration was worth looking into. And so these guys, they asked two questions about inspiration. The first was, is inspiration a real identifiable thing that happens to our brains? Like, is it scientifically observable? And they conducted a big old study, and they observed and talked to thousands of people, and they determined that inspiration is in fact a real identifiable thing. It's different from creativity or insight or effort. Inspiration stands on its own as a thing. And they even found that the frequency of inspiration predicts the number of patents a person holds. So it was like, there was a very strong correlation between inspiration and doing cool stuff. And so, what they found, so there's a scientific observable difference between a person who is inspired and a person who is not. And when I found that out, my next thought was like, well, what am I? It means that, I'm one of them. It's a spectrum, probably like all things are. But, where do I fall on it? And it became, it was like, damn, I don't know what I am. And what are my friends? What are my family? And so then the next question they ask, which is very a happier thought, is, can inspiration be intentionally produced? If I'm not inspired today, can I produce it? And so we'll start with the basics. So inspiration, like I think all words, I didn't study Latin, comes from Latin. In meaning into, and spirare meaning breathe. Is that how you say it? Someone, no? So literally, inspiration means breathing. That's what inspiration means. Figuratively, which is kind of what I'm talking about and what the scientists looked into, they weren't breathing scientists. Figuratively, it means a breathing in of some idea or purpose into the mind. And so the interesting thing about these definitions is that, notice that both of them share something very important. In order to breathe physically, I have to take something from outside of my body and bring it inside, into my lungs. In order to, breathe inspiration into my mind, I have to take something from outside of my body into my mind. And so, that means that inspiration comes from outside of us, from around us. And it's like, if you were in a room, let's say this room, and there was no oxygen in the room. There's plenty of oxygen here, nobody panic. It would, be really uncomfortable, and what would you do? Would you sit in the room and just wait for the oxygen to come back into it? No, you'd freak out, you'd start running around, and you'd look for a different room with oxygen so that you could breathe. And, I am pretty convinced now that inspiration, figurative inspiration, being inspired is exactly the same way. If you're in a room, the same room, and you're not breathing things into your mind that are inspiring you, you have to change it up. You have to change what's around you. And so, from this science, the key to producing inspiration for yourself is kind of simple in a way. Change what's around you. Change it up. Go find the breath that you've been seeking and give yourself an opportunity to actually breathe it in. So, change what's around you. There, believe it or not, are more than one way to do that. The first is kind of the more obvious, which is change what's physically around us. So that's what Milton Hershey did when he went to the World's Fair in 1893. He took himself from Pennsylvania, he rode on a horse and buggy or probably train, I don't know, to Chicago, and he physically changed what was around him so that he could encounter that thing, that special chocolate machine that was the breath into his mind that he needed. So that one, okay, change what's around you. It's relatively clear. The second way that we can change what's around us is to learn how to see more of what's already there. It's a little more confusing, I'll give you that. But the general idea is that two people could be standing in the exact same room at the same time and see totally different things around them based on the knowledge that they have. So, as an example, if you took a stroll through an electrical plant with Nikola Tesla, odds are Nikola knows more about electricity than you do. Unless you're a genius electrical engineer, then okay. And so when you're walking around this with Tesla, you guys literally, I know nothing about electricity, you guys literally have completely different things around you. By Nikola knowing exactly what's going on here, how the pieces fit together, how the whatever makes the whatever, he can see more, see deeper, see more possibilities, more opportunities to become inspired. So from his knowledge, by changing what was in his mind, he actually changed what was around him. So that's the other way, You can physically change what's around you or learn how to see more of what's already there. So the whole thing, it's kind of like shopping. When you need something, you go get it. You can't, if you're hungry, you can't just sit there. I mean, okay, the seamless, I guess there's seamless now, but let's pretend it's not seamless time. And, you sit there And when you're hungry, what do? You have to go to the grocery store. If you want new Crocs, I go to the Croc store in Soho. If, you want to buy a new plant, you're going to go to Home Depot or whatever. You have to go get the things that you need. And inspiration is no different. But the thing that I would love to see is not just a supermarket of food, but a place where we could go and instead of take cereal off of the shelves, take new ideas and new people and things and take new possibilities for myself. Take inspiration off of the shelves. There should be a supermarket of inspiration. And as far as I can tell, the World's Fair is kind of that place. It's like the ultimate changing of what's around you. There's so many opportunities at a place like a World's Fair, like World's Fair Nano, to become inspired, that it is the science of inspiration because you're changing what's around you to give yourself that opportunity. So, our goal is to bring the World's Fair back to the US. We want to organize a 6-month, 100 million person World's Fair in the US to create that supermarket of inspiration so that this resource can be more abundant in the world because it'll just make this place a more epic place to be if we're all inspired. It's like, there's this little kid right there, and this is, these are pics from a World's Fair Nano we did in San Francisco, and, the kid's like staring at the rocket ship, and I don't know, I haven't followed up with him, but maybe, he sees the rocket ship, and now he's on a path, he's been inspired, he took the breath into his mind to becoming the first human to stand on Mars. I don't know. But what I do know is that if the kid never in his life got to encounter a rocket ship or something space related, if he never had the opportunity to breathe something like that into his mind, he would never be on a path to becoming an astronaut. So, my point is that inspiration can be produced. Inspiration shouldn't be this abstract, ephemeral thing that we don't expect to have in our lives. It should be something that we know we can have, and because we know how to get it, which is changing what's around us. So this whole, future of inspiration is one where inspiration should be a basic human right. It should be food, water, and shelter to keep our bodies alive, and inspiration to bring our minds to life. Thank you.